Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Digital Hammurabi. I am your host, Megan Lewis, and today I am very excited to be joined again by writer and journalist Emily Wilson. Emily is a full-time writer, balancing novel writing with some journalism. Her last full-time job was a 5-year stint as editor-in-chief of New Scientist, the world's most popular science magazine. Emily also wrote for The Guardian for 16 years and ran the Australian branch of The Guardian in Sydney for 2 years. She is here to talk to us today about the second book in her epic trilogy entitled The Sumerians. The book, called Gilgamesh, picks up where book one left off, following our hero, the goddess Inanna, her attendant Ninshubor, and the hero Gilgamesh, and adding in a few new voices along the way. I did talk to Emily about her first book just about a year ago, so if you haven't read it, definitely go read it and check out that interview as well. The third book in the trilogy also will be out in August 2025, so you have plenty of time to get through books 1 and 2 before then. Before we get into it, there is a very quick trigger warning. We will be touching on the myth of Enlil and Ninlil, which involves sexual assault. We're not going to be getting graphic at all, but do please listen with care if that is something that affects you. All of the housekeeping out of the way. Emily, hi, thank you so much for coming back.
Thank you very much for having me, Megan. It's a great privilege.
Oh, it's so much fun. I love reading your books and I love talking to you about them. So I'm very excited for you to be here. Now, for those who didn't catch the first interview, could you just tell the audience how you became interested in Mesopotamian myth?
By chance, really. I was looking for a writing project, and I had recently read. I'll go this really quickly because I said this to you last year, but I just read Circe by Madeline Miller. And I thought, this is before the flood of retellings. And I just thought, how clever to take, sort of side female character from history and give her own stage. And then not long after, I reread the Epic of Gilgamesh. My mother was an archaeologist, so we've got a house sort of, full of stuff like that. Rereading it with adult eyes, adult feminist eyes, I was struck by Inanna in the stories about Gilgamesh. I went down an Inanna rabbit hole and I thought, I'll do for Inanna what I did for Circe. But when I sat down to do the novel, other characters sort of rose up and it became more of an ensemble piece. And it basically ended up being, the whole kind of Anunnaki pantheon and drawing in the Epic of Gilgamesh and Anna's big myths and whatever sort of fragments of myths from around the place to flesh out all the different, mainly ghastly characters. So I didn't envisage 5 years ago that I would know as much as I do now. But so it's been 5 years now that I've been in ancient Sumer, and I'm just doing the last in the trilogy now. And it's sort of, I guess, historical fantasy, I guess.
It is. I think that's an excellent description of it. When you're putting all of these things together, you mentioned kind of grabbing different myths and weaving them into one whole, which is actually, for those who are unfamiliar with Mesopotamian mythology, quite hard to do because there are lots of different stories about the same deities that are occasionally contradictory. Did you find it difficult trying to meld everything into a single narrative?
Completely impossible. So after a while, I just had to, once the characters were sort of up and walking around, I just had to really lean into the characters, what they were doing, where they were going, and what made emotional and intellectual sense for where we were. And so like a tiny example of how you might go in with the intention of sort of including bits of myths and it doesn't work. A tiny example is with the myth of Ninlil and Enlil. Ereshkigal and Gilgamesh. There's a weird thing with the chair. There's a big thing with the chair, a chair, and it keeps coming in. It's the chair, and I was like, "Oh, maybe when she gets there, he'll be on a chair." And then in the end, there is no chair now, just because you can't include every motif, you can't even nod to every motif. It just becomes too complicated and too crowded. And sometimes a good example in book one is that the way the myths are or the bits are, it doesn't work for a kind of modern reading audience. So, for example, in book one, Inanna and Gilgamesh never met in my first draft. And then the readers were like, well, that's a shame.
We want to see it.
They were like, yeah, why don't they come together? And like, why doesn't he like try and help her and stuff like that? So I ended up having to just go, well, this is how it really happened. The myths got it wrong. Over thousands of years, errors were introduced. So
is wonderful. Now, I mentioned in the introduction that you bring in a couple of new perspectives in this book. And the first book is primarily written from 3 different viewpoints. You've got Inanna, Gilgamesh, and Ninshubur. This includes several others, including Ereshkigal and Ninlil. Why did you decide to introduce these extra perspectives?
Well, Ereshkigal was already a little bit in book 1. Why did I do it? Why did I do it? Because I've got so many main characters.
It seemed like a good idea.
I know, and every time someone finishes Gilgamesh and they don't say anything, that's a lot of characters. I'm really pleased. So with Ereshkigal, just sort of played around with Ereshkigal, and then she's a very enjoyable person to write because she's mendacious. She's whining, hugely volatile, constantly bursting into tears, and just very, an absolute Tigger, basically. But she's also this very clever, strong, quite funny, fiercely loyal, loving person. So Ereshkigal was one of those characters that rose up and ended up getting probably more than her quarter of book 2. And then also I had this notion from the kind of fragmentary myth of Ereshkigal and Nergal. Although I couldn't get the chair in, he basically goes down to the underworld, back, whatever. And then there's this beautiful line that really moved me about. She kept saying, she didn't have enough time with him. And so that felt like a real emotional something to be part of a novel, her wanting more time with him. So that was how Ereshkigal got in there. And then because the book went from being 1 into a trilogy, I needed a sort of an engine to sort of drive through the story that kind of takes you from book 1 to book 2 to book 3. And I set it up in book 1. There are crumbs in book 1 that the characters talk about the Anunnaki having come down from another realm, and they had to leave. They were sort of kind of burlied out of heaven. And it's mentioned by several characters. One is Enki, the Lord of Wisdom, that it's because of Enlil's conduct that the Anunnaki had to leave heaven. So so I had the sort of clues in that Ninlil, what happened to her at the hands of Enlil, her being taken from her family very young, was hugely significant in the sort of story of the characters of the pantheon. So her assault and abduction, by the way, in the book, I never describe anything. It's just you see all the kind of emotion that comes out of it. So her being taken and the vengeance that was always going to follow from her own family was sort of the engine for it becoming a 3-book cycle rather than just a standalone about Inanna becoming a woman.
It's beautifully done, and there are some very surprising character developments, shall we say. I really don't want to give too much away because I genuinely think people should read the books. And I have to say, I'm not this is no paid promotion. I didn't get an advance copy. I buy these books because I really enjoy them. So I'm not guessing anything by telling people that they should read them. I think they're excellent books. And the way that Ninlil's character develops and the way that Ereshkigal's character develops are 2 of the things that I enjoyed the most, I think, about Gilgamesh. And I liked Ereshkigal in book 1, in Inanna, and you see so much more of her. And one of the things that I really do enjoy is that she seems very divorced from reality, but in a way that isn't... you're not depicting her as this crazy lady. She's not insane. She's just, her reality is slightly different, and it definitely is written, or seems to be written, as though it's a coping mechanism for Ereshkigal to deal with things that have happened to her that aren't fully elaborated on, but it's clear that something has happened to her that has made her unwilling to deal with the rest of her family and the rest of the world. How did you arrive at that creative decision to take Ereshkigal, the queen of the underworld, and make her kind of disjointed and fragmented?
So I suppose with each of the characters, I'd sort of look at what there was, all the different fragments, and sort of live with the fragments and see what made sense. So Ereshkigal, well, she's in the underworld. That's terrible. She's in this story where she really falls for this guy Nurgle, and then he's removed, and she did not have enough time with him. When her sister without meaning to ruin the whole plot, book one, when her sister comes down to visit her in the underworld, she has her monsters, her demons, kill her sister and hang her on a hook behind her throne. So I thought, that's quite a lot, isn't it? That's quite extreme. So she grew out of that. Why she became sort of funny and tricksty, that's just how people grow in novels. I sort of had an idea, a slight guiding principle where I was sort of Inanna, Ninshubur, as I pronounce it, you pronounce it no doubt more correctly as Ninshubur, and Ereshkigal, the three of them. I always thought of them as a sort of trinity, where they have all these different facets of womanhood and character and responsibility, whatever. I had that kind of basic idea in the beginning because I wanted them all to be very different, but to kind of work together. And all of them got handed out different bits of how I know I can be. And like my very worst self, but also partly some of my best self, is Ereshkigal. So it's being like really self-centered, and yet she's sometimes very kind, isn't she? So and very thoughtful and saving the day yet again. So yeah, so that's Ereshkigal.
She's excellent. I enjoyed her a lot. Now, we've mentioned a couple of times that you dive into one of the more challenging myths from Mesopotamia, the myth of Enlil and Ninlil. And this is really a key event in your writing and how the Anunnaki came to Earth. Was there a particular reason why you decided to use this story as that driving force, that engine, or did it just seem to fit the best?
With all the myths, there's weird stuff in it. People born in different people's bodies, and there's one of a rape story about Inanna and a guard. There's sort of lots of grim stuff with the story of Ninlil, the little girl, and Enlil, the god. Much, an old man or a grown man. It reads very differently, I think, from all the other myths. It reads like a crime, or it read like that to me. It was quite surprising and shocking, and seemed jarring, and didn't seem sort of smoothed over and repeated and somehow standardized as lots of the stuff in lots of the myths. So for me, it stood out as quite an aberration, or something quite startling in the mix, as something where there would be repercussions from that. The little girl came from a family. There are repercussions, and so it did fit well, but it also made sort of emotional sense for people fleeing one realm and coming to another and starting over.
Thank you. As you were writing, did any of the characters surprise you particularly in the turns that they took, or did they behave as anticipated?
No, none of them behaved. Sometimes they rise up. I think I may have mentioned that to you before. So like with Gilgamesh, he needed someone to talk to in the scenes, to bring him his spear, bring him his breakfast beer, whatever. So I made a guy called Hagar, and then Hagar by book 3 has his own point of view and his cast iron hero as big as the others. And so he wasn't intended to have his own voice and his own say and his own weight. It's just he sort of gained weight and sort of moral authority as time went on, and then it was enjoyable to write through his eyes and in book 3 and give him and his whole history kind of perspective. I suppose they all surprise you. I mean, in book 1, Ninshubur threatened to flatten everything, because Ninshubur, or as you say, Ninshubur, she was only meant to be around because Inanna gets murdered, and then who's going to tell the story? And she's sort of, you know, left outside the underworld. Her mission is, you know, or her instructions for Inanna are go and get help if anything goes wrong. So she didn't really have a very big character or a big part, but she's another person who became very strong and very vibrant. And then you almost thought, well, what's the point of it even being in Sumer with the Sumerians if you've got an Ninjabar around? I think it's quite standard, isn't it, to have characters elbowing others out the way when you hadn't really thought that was going to happen. Yeah. And Marduk as well, the Potter, is another one where, because there's actually not much of him in the books, but sometimes people like him best. You know, so he surprises me, and sometimes in his popularity.
He's a fun character. He is definitely a fun character.
He just doesn't have actually much, compared with someone like Ereshkigal, who actually gets chapters and chapters. He doesn't get much airtime, but anyway.
Now, you've just released the cover art for the final book in the trilogy, which is Ninjable. I'm going to pop that on the screen for people watching on YouTube. What can we expect to see in the final record, obviously without giving all the game away, of our hero's adventure?
Well, I suppose, as will probably be obvious to about 4 people, oh, well, maybe it's not obvious. Maybe it is obvious. That the whole book is meant to be the sort of architecture is meant. I'm trying to land like a creation myth. I'm trying to ultimately land, you know, a Mesopotamian creation myth. That's what it's meant to be. I don't know how to pronounce it properly. You will. The Enuma Elish?
Enuma Elish.
Elish, okay. So that's what I'm trying to kind of ultimately, in a way, the whole thing will be. So anyone who's read that will have lots of clues about what might happen at the end. So.
I have to say, I'm very much looking forward to potentially seeing more of Tiamat, because she pops up as a very peripheral character who is talked about, but you don't see her in book 2. And given the kind of innovative directions you've taken some of the other characters, I'm very interested to see what happens with her.
Yes, Yes, she does appear with her whole awful. They're even worse than the Anunnaki. Yeah, her whole family appear there.
Excellent. We do have one question from the audience, if I can find it. Yes. Do you think that the Epic of Gilgamesh can accurately be considered the first book?
As you and your audience will know really well, it was only gathered together quite late in the kind of form it is now, as a sort of set of stories, an epic, and they're all on clay tablets. So it depends what your definition of book is. Are you asking, is it the first piece of literature? In which case, there's some evidence that Inanna's stories, her descent, her going to Eridu and attacking Enki, may arguably be a little bit older, 100 years older. But he is certainly one of the he's either the first or one of the first 2 characters in literature. But yeah, I suppose you could make a big argument for the Epic of Gilgamesh in its Babylonian form being a sort of novel. What do you think, Megan?
I think that's probably a reasonable assessment. Obviously, we've got stories prior to that, but I think the Epic of Gilgamesh is definitely one of the first longer works of literature with like an overarching theme.
Yeah,
I can't think of any longer works of literature that have that kind of moralistic tendency or aim in the writer. So I think I'd be comfortable.
Yeah, although you've got like some quite long creation myths, and you could sort of argue that they were short books, or it depends if you go, it has to be more than 1 tablet long to be a book, or it has to be 10 tablets to be a book. Yes, it's supposed. Oh, I just realised we haven't actually talked very much about Gilgamesh, which
is true, and he's the titular character.
His name is on this book. Yeah, I suppose it's because I raced through the epic in book 1 in Inanna. So in this book, although I am still kind of roving around Gilgamesh stories and things like the Envoys of Akka, it's more that he is an established character creeping his way, I hope, towards adulthood, and him, his best self in this one. Yeah,
he does definitely gain a level of maturity, I think, through this book that doesn't necessarily come across in the first book, or indeed in the epic.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So he is just not. Yeah, yeah. He as you'll see in book 3, it's not a perfect. It's not a completely smooth journey. But he's such a kind of wonderful and complicated and fun character to write about. And as I'm sure the person who asked that question is aware, his popularity for millennia is astounding, because it's not completely obvious that the guy going to a forest, attacking some kind of monster, having a really, really, really close male friend who he then holds for 7 days and 7 nights until a maggot falls out of his friend's dead body's nose. All of these things, you wouldn't instantly put it all together as go, wow, that's a story that will echo through the ages. And then I suppose his journey to find immortality has, this sort of, the first hero's journey. I suppose that's more, you can see, the quest for immortality kind of feels like something that might ring. But people loved all Gilgamesh stories, didn't they? Like the Envoys of Akka, which is just a fragment of King Akka coming and attacking Uruk and Gilgamesh being on the walls, was copied out for literally millennia by, you'll know better than I will, by schoolboys, school children. They loved it. He was the kind of Marvel hero, or much more of his age, or a god of his age. Yeah.
No, he definitely is one of those characters that really resonated with both his culture of origin, but then has clearly, given that you are still writing about him, clearly has an awful lot to offer. So many hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years later.
Yeah, but he also all the different civilizations in the region all kept embracing them, didn't he? I mean, Akkadians, Babylonians, everyone who layered up on top all kept the Gilgamesh thing alive. And it's sort of, in a way, it's amazing that he got lost, and it's also amazing that 150 years ago or whatever, he was rediscovered and found. And in a way, obviously your viewers will all know about Gilgamesh, but I'm astounded as I go around by how many people have no idea who he had, never heard his name, despite his sort of great place in the history of history, as this sort of first hero of history, in this place that was the first civilization. So amazing.
It is. And I think a lot of this unfamiliarity with Mesopotamia and Mesopotamian literature is because, for whatever reason, the mythology hasn't been taken up by people like yourself, by people writing popular fiction. Like we've got a couple of comics that kind of touch on Mesopotamia, but there's nothing like the Wonder Woman stories, which are like rooted in Greek mythology. That does seem to be shifting, and that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited about what you're doing, because it really is helping to popularize and spread knowledge about Mesopotamia.
When you see, something, I don't know if you saw the Netflix show Chaos, and it took with Jeff Goldblum as Zeus, and sorry, dog's barking. And it kind of took all of Greek mythology, smashed it up, exploded it in a modern setting, and with kind of modern police forces, but still human sacrifice. Anyway, and it only worked because, well, apart from all the great acting and writing, it worked because we all are so familiar, even if we don't know that we are, with Theseus, with the Minotaur. So we could just be thrown all these crumbs and go, oh, delicious. Sadly, it's been cancelled apparently, but anyway. But with Mesopotamia, we're kind of quite far from that, from people noticing Easter eggs and going, oh, that's the story about. We're not quite there yet, but anyway, I do think there are. Well, my evidence of this is small, but I think the British Museum is planning a Sumerians exhibit, which is quite exciting.
That is exciting.
And I was in touch with the museum in New York that did the Enhedwana exhibition, and I think they're going to do something on Gilgamesh. And then I think quite a well-known writer is going to do kind of a picture book about, a graphic book about Gilgamesh. So there are kind of these bits and bobs coming. So yeah.
There's definitely a lot more than there was even 5 years ago. So I am excited about that, and thank you for all of the work that you're doing to contribute to that. We just have one more audience question, then we are going to wrap things up for the day. But someone is asking, do you have any advice for aspiring writers with stories set in the ancient Near East? Were there any unique challenges you encountered while writing and publishing?
No. I would have liked to have gone to Uruk, and I know, because I'm like on my own and at home, I don't know how to say everything as well as you or Megan, but and Eridu, I'd love to go to these places, but it wasn't possible because of the security situation at the time. I think some people do go on holiday there from England, but so no. And I think that there are sensitivities around, I kind of made my Gilgamesh bisexual, and I think that's a sort of problem if you want to be published in the region. But anyway, no, there are no particular challenges really, other than that it's really super hard writing a book, even though it's just like typing, or it takes a really long time. It takes a kind of unbelievable amount of discipline, rigor. In my case, it takes, you have to do it every single day if you want your brain to be present for that kind of creative project. So it just takes huge amounts of time. I just think like any book takes huge amount of time, huge amount of your brain, and you have to sort of, one of my characters, Ninchubar, her kind of, her motto is one step and then the next, and I have to say that to myself every day with book writing, because it can be so, even though if you pick up a book, you go, oh, that was yum, 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 finished in 4 hours. To make something, enjoyable can be a lot of slog. And so rather than, when I feel overwhelmed by the scale of the project and how it's not good enough yet by so much, and I've got to do so much more work, I kind of channel Ninchubar's one step and then the next. I go, I would just work on this chapter, and that's what I'm going to do today. I'll do my best to do this. And so that's kind of very diffuse, non-specific advice, but that is some of my writing advice.
But excellent advice. And I have to say, one step and then another is something that I would definitely benefit from adding to my own daily self-narrative.
when you're just, it can be so easily in life to be overwhelmed with how much there is left to do, and the only way for me to tackle that is by just thinking about this one thing here now for a while.
Well, Emily, thank you so much for coming and talking to us. I will definitely be inviting you back on after I've read Ninchubar, which is coming out in August of next year, I believe.
Yeah, I know, such long gaps with books, but yes.
Given the character's refusal to behave and all of the difficult writing process, I think that's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for watching. We'll be back very soon. Please enjoy and definitely go and read all the books.
Great. Thank you very much.
Digital Hammurabi is made possible by generous sponsorship from our patrons. Their support means that we have the technological and academic resources necessary to bring the ancient world directly to you. If you want to join the team, go to patreon.com/Digital Hammurabi to see how you can help.